Hello and welcome to the spring sprayer maintenance and checkout section of the Finch Services virtual school. Okay, the first two things we're going to discuss today are the annual replacement things. These are the things that are listed in the operator's manual as far as things that need to be replaced every year. Oftentimes overlooked, but they really need to be dealt with so you don't have downtime mid-season. So the first thing we're going to talk about really is if you have a diaphragm pump set up. What's behind me is a centrifugal, but if you have a diaphragm, you have the larger 3-piston diaphragm pump mounted over here. And this has a wear item in it, which is primarily the diaphragms themselves. We do not want those failing mid-season because it does give you a good bit of downtime. And what we need to do is we need to pop the heads off it, replace those diaphragms, and then also while those are out, we're also doing the oil. Oil in those pumps is a 30-weight non-detergent oil. So we're going to be doing both. We're going to replace the diaphragms, we're going to replace the oil, get that pump up to spec. While we're in there, also just take a quick peek at your check valves. If you haven't done them in a few years, maybe just go ahead and order those, get the O-rings for them. But we need to at least do a visual inspection, make sure they're correct. On top of that, our next item is going to be if we have a foamer installed. A lot of you are going to have foamers on these things, and there is a replaceable hose in this assembly. It's a peristaltic pump, so it has a hose that gets squeezed inside that actually does the fluid pumping for you, and it is a wear item. It's a fairly simple procedure, it's a fairly cheap part, and it'll keep you from having premature foamer wear where you get all these drips coming out of the bottom of your foamer box. And on top of that, you've just got a lot of moisture. It gets all gummed up in there. So we need to take care of that before it actually becomes a problem. All right, we got a little bit of a close-up view here. A lot of you have never actually pulled one of these apart. It is a very simple process, and for the time it takes, we may as well just do it. I already removed all the screws here just to make this process a little tiny bit quicker. Now you pop the cover off, and you can take this hose right out of this housing. You will have to roll it a little bit. You can roll this around with your fingers. You can pop this hose right on out. Now this is a wear item. This one actually already has some wear on it. It's got some gouging in it. It is a thick wall, but over time it does wear down, and you'll get pinholes and it'll leak all over the place. So pretty simple. It just has these little tiny ratcheting clamps on it. You pop those off, grab your new hose, push it on, put the clamps back on, and then you can roll the new hose right on in. You gotta roll it around. Make sure it's squished down all the way. Get that all seated in there. And then get the pump cover back right on there. All your bolts in. Sometimes it takes a little bit of a jiggle to get them started. And I'll spare you watching me run them all the way in. But that's pretty much all there is to it. It's quick, easy. Okay, next thing is going to be a little bit of more of the maintenance side, as far as some things that have been probably going on throughout the year that may have done or not done, but this is a good time to just go through all of it and just make sure everything is exactly the way it should be. So probably the first thing we're going to talk about is just cleaning the sprayer. You should be performed after every time you spray. I understand that doesn't always happen, but it really should happen. We should really be cleaning out, at least rinsing the unit off, rinsing the tank out, running it through all your boom lines, making sure we get everything out. And probably the biggest reason for that is sediment. We get sediment sitting in lines, and it builds up and ends up in chunks, and we end up with clogs. But part of your end of year and beginning of spring service, you really should be running some type of product to clean out all of your lines, fittings, valves, and everything. No affiliation on this one, but my personal preference is Nutrasol. It's a good product to get mixed up in your tank, run it through all your lines, get it through all of your fittings, all of your seals, just get every little bit that you can out of it, short of taking everything apart and scrubbing it down. I think it's probably the next best thing. After that, we're going to be looking at making sure you go through all your strainers. So obviously, you're probably familiar with your large strainer over here. Pretty simple system. You just take the nut off, drop it down, and it has a strainer inside. We should be checking that. We should be cleaning it all throughout the year. But right now is a good time to really take a good look at it. This one's got some wear on it. We actually have something that's been used for once. And we should at least be cleaning this. Cleaning procedure is water, mild dish detergent. It's pretty simple. We should also be just looking at making sure it is in one piece, don't have any chunks, holes, taking a look at the O-rings, making sure it's not crumpled. This is a good time. If you have any doubts about it, replace it. It's honestly your best policy. You got it out now, you have time, it's not incurring downtime during the season. On that strainer, there's actually a flush valve on the bottom. Big red nut sticking down at the bottom. This, if you have not used it, is designed to flush the housing when you get a lot of sediment buildup, particularly if you're using a soluble that runs around in there, and it'll clog up that filter mid-spray. You don't really want to take that all apart, but you can open the flush valve, run the flush system in there, and it will actually chuck your large contaminants from your filter. It'll actually push them down and back into the tank, particularly to avoid some clumping. That also, often that valve doesn't get moved because a lot of people don't know it exists. When you cycle it, at least every day you spray with it, it'll stay freed up. But a lot of times they get seized. So now is probably a good time to check that. Make sure it is, because when you do go to use it, you want it to actually work. We don't want to be mid-season, mid-spray, and we got a clog. We have to drop the sprayer all out and clean it. It's handy when it actually works. So maybe give it a twist, make sure it all works. All right, now we've talked at least about that strainer. Depending upon which nozzle tips you're running, you may actually be running individual nozzle tip screens or strainers. So this will also be a good time to check those. This current setup only has AICs on it, so they do not have these strainers in it. But if you pull them off and check, and it'll either pop out in the nozzle or it'll be sitting up in the turret. You need to check those, make sure they're clean, no holes. If we can, just replace them. If not, or who knows, we may be changing nozzles mid-season. We don't know what's going on, but it's often overlooked because a lot of people don't know, depending if they've had their tips off recently or not. We don't know if they're in there, but just double check, something that's often overlooked. Okay, now we're already on the topic of nozzles, but we're also going to talk about the turrets themselves. Each one of the turrets actually has a small check valve and diaphragm system in it. And it just is merely a screw cap on the end. It's got a little red center. We can pop one of those off real quick. So all that's in here is we have a little diaphragm, and it's a spring-loaded system. And it can be a little bit difficult to pop out of here. Come on, girl. There we go. It's a very simple system. We just have this little diaphragm. It's spring-loaded in here. It does have a little alignment tab on the back here. It's a little pin. It shoves into the hole on the other side of it. It's a good time to check these. We want to pop them apart, clean them, make sure they're all in good condition. There's no tears, there's no debris inside the turret assembly. They'll actually build up debris right behind there. So just take a quick glance in there and look, make sure there's nothing silly going on. They're a fairly simple part, and one of the things they do help massively with is the idea of this, because it's a spring-loaded check valve. It actually keeps your product in your lines, and it doesn't just run out all over the ground. You'll see this oftentimes. You'll shut a boom off, and it'll sit there and it'll just dribble constantly for a couple seconds when you don't really want it to, because chances are at that point you've driven over something you don't want to spray on. All right, next thing we're going to talk about here is the flow meter assembly. This is something that we really should be checking at least every year. And one of the things is if we can actually disassemble this, we can check to make sure there's no debris, we can check for wear, and make sure everything's in good condition. So what we're going to do is there's a wire clip here that pulls out. Pull that right out of the front. Just a simple wire clip. And then this top center section here actually pulls out of the valve body itself. Probably the best tool I've found for this is a big pair of needle nose, because it allows you to get underneath that top lip and give it a little tug. Get my arms in here. Give it a little tug, a little pry, pops right out. In here we have a little wheel with our pickups on it. We want to take that wheel, we want to look for how much wear we have. We got a lot of wear on this. It'll actually start to oscillate. We'll get some weird numbers out of it. This one's actually in very good condition. Probably the best check for it, honestly, is if you can blow on it and it spins, you're probably good. A lot of these will get gummed up, but this one should be all right. I'll just give it a little blow. Nope, hold up, come on. It's going to make a liar out of me. Okay, well, I can't get my head right in there. So, but as we can see, it is actually very free and spinning. On top of that, we're going to actually look in the housing itself. I'm going to try to flip her over here. Let's see it. We're going to look down inside, see if we have any nasty buildup, sediment and stuff, because it'll actually get a little valley in there. We'll get some sediment, and actually the bottom of the little wheel will actually get stuck into that sediment and it won't rotate. So we want to make sure that's all clean in here, make sure this spins well, make sure there isn't a lot of play in it, make sure everything looks all good in there. And on the way back in, it is worth noting, there is an alignment pin. There's a hole in the side of this, and then there's actually a stainless pin in the body itself. So if you're fighting it going back in, make sure those are aligned. A lot of people overlook that and they're trying to push it back in, it won't seat. That's probably why. You need to get that alignment pin. So we're going to look at where the hole is, we're going to look at where the alignment pin is in the housing, get it lined up, pop it in, and take our clip, push it right back in, and we're good to go. Alright, so next thing we're going to talk about is the boom height and level. This is something that's usually factory set. We set them all before they leave. But you never know what's going to happen out in the field. There are things that settle and move. And on top of that, we don't know, possibly you've changed nozzle tips, or you just have a nozzle tip that just straight up has a completely different spec for it. So what we're going to do first, we're going to check the actual height. So we have the center section height, which we're going to set first. What we're going to do, we're going to check that from the ground to the bottom at the edge of the nozzle, and we're going to look for a dimension that is specified for that nozzle. What we have on here right now, these AICs are going to be 20s and 20, so we're looking at a 20-inch spacing between them, and we're looking at 20 inches from the ground. That's going to give us our proper overlap on our spray. And actually, before I even get to that, I really should mention this. We need to be on a level surface. Unfortunately, our filming area here is not exactly level, but we should have the vehicle on a level surface. We should have it in approximately a half a tank of chemical or water. Really not shouldn't be doing this chemical. I should have stated that. We're going to have half a tank of water. We're going to be on a level surface, and our tire pressure is in the correct tires. This is often overlooked. We may be trying to set our level on our boom, and one of our tires is low. We get everything leveled out. Get it out there, and somewhere in there we decide to fill the tire, and then all of a sudden we've got a crooked boom, we've got weird overlaps going on. So once we got level, we've got a good half tank in here, and we can go ahead and we'll check our level and height of our boom, measuring from the ground to the bottom of the nozzle tip. We're going to look at both sides. We're going to take that, look at that. If we are within spec, we're good. If we're not, we need to move it. You have our U-bolts here that are mounted into the sprayer frame itself. There's nuts on the back side. We're going to go ahead and we're going to support the boom with something that is capable of supporting it, preferably on both sides. Loosen those up, and we're going to move it up or down as needed, and then retighten, remove our support, and then recheck it. After that, once we've got that where we're satisfied with it, we're going to go out and we're going to check our wings. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go ahead and check our outermost wingtip, verify that is where we want it. Chances are it's not. At that point, our adjustments for that are in the center of the boom. There is a nut for each side. We can crank those in or out, and that will raise or lower our wingtip. Now, on that note, we can adjust that. It will move, but it does not mean that's where it's going to be. This often is overlooked. When we do adjust these, it does stress and tension the assembly a little bit differently every time. But the best practice for that is get it where you want it and make sure it settles. So at the same time, we're also going to check the breakaway spring and the breakaway mechanism. We're going to pull it back and we're going to let it settle. Recheck it, because chances are it just moved again. Reset it again, settle it again, check it again. Always do it 2 or 3 times, because the chances are it moved. And we all know when this thing gets out there and gets to bouncing around, it's going to settle itself. So if we don't do ourselves a favor and settle it first, we're not going to get the right height. Alright, now that we've done catch test, I've talked about doing a fill and then spraying it out. We've got our calibration for our flow meter, we're good there. Last thing I see here is we get a lot of units in that do not have the boom throttling valve set correctly. There's 3 knobs here. What this system does is actually a flow return. So when the booms are shut off, it's actually still pumping. The fluid is still going through the whole system. Only thing that changes really when the master is off is the flow meter isn't registering anything. It just shuts off flow meter register so it doesn't constantly count. Now, each one of these is designed to bypass the specified amount of flow that you would normally have going through all of that section of nozzles, and it's just going to bypass it back to tank. Because the idea here is when you shut off all your booms, it doesn't deadhead the system. The system's still going to function as if all of the booms are on, and you're able to let your main throttling valve actually regulate to the proper pressure and stay there. And when you put the boom on, flow doesn't change, it doesn't have to do anything, your pressure doesn't change, and your application rate doesn't change. It keeps everything consistent. But these right here are responsible for keeping those things consistent. So, the process for setting these is fairly simple. And I'm not going to try to yell over the ProGator right now, although I will do a quick actual running presentation on it. But what we're going to do is we're going to start the ProGator up. We're going to run it up all the way up to wide open. We're going to have all of these are currently closed. We're going to turn them all the way in. They're going to all be closed. We're going to turn all of our booms on, and we're going to look at what pressure. You can use the gauge here. I personally don't think it has enough resolution. I like to be able to see down to 1 psi if I can. So I actually have the controller back here, and I can look at the pressure readout on it. This pressure transducer is very accurate. I trust its readings. And we've already calibrated it at this point, so we should be good to go there. The idea of this test right now, with these closed, we're going to turn all the booms on. All of them are going to spray at once. We're going to see how much pressure we get out of it. At that point, when we shut one boom off, because that's exactly what we're going to do, we're going to start with turning one boom off. That pressure is going to jump up because we don't have as many nozzles to spray through. The flow is going to be restricted. The pressure is going to go up. Then, the boom that we shut off, the corresponding throttling valve, we are going to open it up to allow that flow back into tank until we bring our pressure down to where it was when we started. And then, we're going to stop there, and we're going to turn that boom back on, and we're going to move to the next one. We're going to shut the next boom off, we're going to open this up until the pressure matches our original pressure again, and then again for the last one in the series. Now, at the end of this, I do also check it with 2 off. I'll leave 1 on, turn 2 off. The whole idea here is when these are set properly, you should be able to have unit on, running, everything wound all the way up. You should be able to toggle each boom individually, and your pressure, you will see it drop momentarily as the valve actually takes its time to cycle, but it should equalize out at the end. It should just stay steady. Alright, now we've moved back in because myself and our cameraman here have decided it is entirely too cold to be doing this outside. We picked one of the coldest days this week to do this, apparently. So, the throttling valves here. What we did, obviously, was we ran the unit up to pressure. Everything was closed here. Then we shut one boom off, and then we adjusted the valve associated with that boom, screwed it out until our pressure matched our original pressure reading. The idea of that was to match the flow of the nozzles, using this valve to match the flow of the nozzles so that when we shut the boom off, the flow does not change, and that will keep our pressures consistent. Now, a side note on that is we see one thing that comes back a lot on these sprayers, particularly when they come in for service. These, number one, won't be adjusted at all. They'll be all over the place. Or the other part of it is no one will have actually moved the rings. These actually have indicator rings on here that are numbered. And I'll explain for a moment why they're numbered and why that would be a good idea to set those. Because we have set it. In theory, they're not going to be touched right now. And the easiest way to set these is there is actually there's a recess behind the ring, and I'm just using a pocket screwdriver here. And this ring will actually pop forward. And you can see here it's a completely separate piece, and it's serrated back here. What we're going to do is we're going to take it and we're going to find the 0. I've gone past it. There we go, the 0. And we're going to line it up with the indicator up top. And we're going to push this ring back on its place. A little stiff. There we go. There, it's all the way on. So now, if we happen to move this valve, we can just go right back to 0, no problem. Now, there is actually a secondary reason for this, because remember I specifically said this has to do with compensating for flow through the nozzles. We want to match the flow going back to tank when the boom shuts off. We want to match the flow of the nozzles. A lot of you possibly are running more than one set of nozzles. And when you run more than one set of nozzles, we want to take our main set that we're using and we're going to set it at 0. But there is a high probability that if you're running a secondary set for something that maybe doesn't get all that much use, but you do swap over them every once in a while, there may be, you may want to touch these again. And the best thing to do at that point is, once you have all these zeroed with your main nozzles, go ahead and flip over to your secondaries and redo these and see where they end up, because you may find actually there'll be a +2, +3, +4, and you may want to write those numbers down, because this is a big thing. When you swap nozzles over, you really need to readjust these, but I don't expect you to go through the whole adjustment procedure again. But if it happens to just be secondary nozzles that get used occasionally, at least you have a number that you can go, well, I've swapped nozzles, we need to put +3 on all my throttle valves here, and that will be pretty darn close, and we can go back to 0 when we go back to our main nozzles. There's a whole reason these rings are numbered and that you can move them, and that's so you can repeat adjustments if you do have other minor adjustments you have to do in the field, like swapping nozzles. Alright, so we've gone over the calibrations, we've gone over some annual maintenance items. Last thing we really want to just hit on here is probably one of the larger complaints that we hear a lot about that no one really knows exactly how to resolve, or they've tried to resolve it and something has gone amiss with this adventure in solving the problem. The last one has to do with booms leaking. This is when you're going in between holes or something. You've got your pump on because you got your agitation on, and one of the booms is just constantly dribbling all over the place. Now there's two different things we hear about on this. One of them is you do have drips after the boom shuts off. And we had mentioned this previously about the diaphragms in each one of the turrets, making sure they're good, clean, not cracked up, no debris in them. That's one thing. And I'm talking more now about the constant leaks. These are the ones that are the agitation. You've got agitation running, your pump running, you're going in between holes, and it is just, you've got one side, one boom that is just, it doesn't seem like it wants to shut off all the way. So we're going to be talking about the boom valves here. A few tips or tricks about these. Taking them apart is fairly simple. We've got a lot of parts in here to look at. I'm going to be going over a main thing, which is I'm just going to refer to right now as the valve stem assembly. You can buy it as an assembly, you can get it in parts, but I generally like to do them as an assembly, and I'm going to illustrate exactly why here in a moment. But first thing, they are a little bit of a fight to get apart. The first time particularly been assembled of the whole season. And it is a spring-loaded assembly in here, and this is one thing that gets overlooked sometimes. So the first thing I do to make my life a little bit easier is whatever one I'm going to be taking apart, I'm actually going to turn the unit on, I'm going to power the controller up, and I'm going to turn that boom valve on. So I'm going to put it in manual mode, which it seems like all we've been today is manual mode. And I'm going to turn the boom on that I'm going to work on, or I may as well just open all of them, because why not? I don't know. I don't feel like figuring out which one it is, but we're just going to open all of them. Turn all the booms on, turn the master on. Obviously, since the pump isn't running, the gator isn't running, nothing's going to come out. There is going to be some residual in the lines, but it's not going to be a major issue. So at this point, all my valves are open. And on these open, it actually pulls the whole valve stem and plungers and everything up. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually alleviating pressure on the bottom seat inside here, which I'm going to get to here in a moment. So I'm going to take a quick pause, and we're going to bring the camera on a little closer.
Okay.
All right, so now we're going to take the wire clip out of this fitting. We're going to grab the fitting and the hose assembly, and we're going to give it a good wiggle, maybe a bit of a twist. Who knows? Sometimes they take a little bit extra to get out. There we go. There's some of the residual that comes out. It is really cold. It's cold outside. So at this point, first thing we're going to look at, since we just got here, is we're going to actually look at this hose end here. Now this fitting doesn't look like much, it just seems like part of this assembly here where it just fits in to adapt the actual valve stack onto the hose. It's actually more than that. This face here is actually the bottom sealing surface of this valve. So if we have any cracks, scoring, debris, or anything built up on this fitting, we need to take care of that, and by whatever means, whether it be just cleaning or honestly just replace it. If you have questions on this seat, just replace it, because this is half of your sealing surface for that boom. So if it's leaking, look really hard at this sealing surface. It's often overlooked. We get this quite a bit. So now we're going to tuck that out of the way, and I'm actually going to flip the master switch back off on my rate controller. And the idea of that is the plungers were up. And what I was saying about spring loaded and having to do with the seat on that fitting is when the plungers are down, it's seated against the fitting, blocking the boom. When the plungers are up, it opens that. And it's a little hard to get to the plungers when they're tucked all the way up inside the valve. So I shut the master off, the plungers run back down. Now, the valve stem inside is a round stem, but it has two flats on it. My personal tool of choice for this is a small adjustable wrench. It's just narrow enough to fit up in there, and I'm able to get onto the flats of that stem. Now, I'm not going to try to get the camera up in here to show that, but I will illustrate it when I get it out. So we're going to get right up in the center there, grab the flats. I got it loose, so now I can spin that stem out. It's threaded up onto the valve. And actually a cool trick to getting these in and out a little bit quicker if you're really interested in going a little bit farther with this, if you're taking apart in and out a lot, you can actually grab a piece of small rubber hose that fits over the ends of these. You can just push up on them and it makes threading these in and out really quickly. Couldn't find mine today, but just a quick tip on that. All right, here's our valve stem. On the end, we obviously have the two flats on the end of the round shaft, and then we have our upper and lower seals here. And these are a soft. They're not a rubber compound. The exact compound doesn't come to mind, but these are a soft sealing surface. They're conical, and that's what actually makes your seals. So if we bring our hose over here a little bit, this interface right here, when this actually pushes down, it pushes onto this fitting, and that is actually what's shutting our boom valve off. And they are spring loaded. So when this thing is actually down and shut off, it's actually holding some spring pressure against this fitting. That's why I was talking about using the actual rate controller and turning the booms on and off, is because these fittings, sometimes they're a little bit more difficult to take apart when there's spring pressure against them. Same with reinstalling them. But, so what we're doing here is we've already looked at this fitting. We know maybe our sealing surface on here is good. We're not too worried about it. Then we move on to our plunger, and we look at our sealing surfaces. And this one actually does have a piece of debris. Now, it may be difficult to see in the camera, probably almost impossible to see in the camera, but we do actually have a chunk of something stuck on it, which may be causing a leak. Luckily, it is not currently, but it could be. So we want to inspect this sealing surface. It does take wear. It is a soft material. It will take wear over time. It will harden over time. So we need to make sure that it is okay and we're safe putting it back in. It is possible to get them in parts, but one thing you should be noting here is that that seal actually floats on this center shaft since it is spring loaded. So you are dealing with multiple sealing surfaces here. Not only are you dealing with the sealing surface here where the cone of this seal actually fits into the fitting, you're also dealing with the seal of it around the shaft itself. And you will sometimes get debris stuck between the shaft and in the center, or you'll get scoring, and it will leak out in between there. You'll think it's just this outer sealing surface that's leaking. Everything looks fine, but in reality, it's leaking through the center. So, general, if these have any serious wear on them, you got any kind of chunks or scoring, you've got really big, deep grooves where they're actually meeting your sealing surfaces. Best option is replace it as an assembly. You can get the whole assembly together, and it's just a matter of unscrew the old one, screw the new one in. And when I replace these, just another thing is, for how much this fitting typically costs on the other end, just do it, or at least keep one on hand. Because you'd be surprised how often this fitting is actually the culprit of someone calling and saying, hey, my boom won't shut off all the way. You put a brand new stem assembly in it, put a brand new fitting in there, you should be good to go. Beyond that, leaks having to do with specific booms, you'll have to get up in the actuator assembly itself, and that is quite the teardown. It is doable, but I don't think that is specific detail. It's not often we have leaks up from above that or a mechanical fault, so we're not going to go too far into that. Since most of your leaks and issues can pretty much be eliminated by pulling these out, checking them, cleaning them up some, making sure everything's good, and reinstalling. Reverse installation is pretty well just the reverse of removal. You push it up in there, thread it on. Grab our adjustable. Snug it up. Doesn't take much force. To be honest, I'm just using my fingers just on the outside of this wrench. I'm not really giving it a whole lot of force. It doesn't have any rotational force on it, so as long as it's snug enough to keep it from vibrating loose, you're good to go. Now, it is down. If I try to push this fitting in now, it will go up, but that last bit will fight you, and you'll have a hard time getting that wire clip in. So, I'll go back to my controller, which I happen to have right here, because there is enough wire. And then I'll turn all the booms on, and that allows all the plungers to come up. Obviously, I'm doing them all at once right now. You probably really only need to do the one you're accessing, but it's easier just to have them all on. Flip the master on, all of them go up out of the way, and that fitting should go back up in there all the way. It is worth noting this clip will fight if it is not all the way up. So there is actually, they will fit all the way up flush against there. If there's a gap, your wire clip isn't going to go in, and you're going to fight it. And the more times you put it back in fighting it, it wears into the groove, and it's more chances that fitting sitting a little bit too low, not sitting up far enough, and you lose some of that pressure from that valve stem. So makes your life easier. So just run the plungers up by turning the booms on, push the fitting in, make sure it's all the way, and then put your wire clip in, and you should just be able to put that with finger pressure, no problem. Pop that in. And at this point, you're ready to recheck it, see if it leaks. Well, I hope you've enjoyed watching this lovely educational video. I know you're all absolutely thrilled to have this virtual school this year. No chicken this year, unfortunately. No ice cream either. But we're doing the best we can. We wish you the best of luck out there and good health. And if you have any other questions about this, I understand this was generally a very general guide to some of the more common things going on with these units. But obviously, feel free to contact us if you have any more detailed questions on it, about anything that went on here, or obviously if you have any other issues going on with the equipment, we'll do our absolute best to help you. Have a good one.